The case was brutal from the start. Deshaun Carter, barely 19, sat accused of robbing a gas station at gunpoint. The evidence: a blurry security camera still, a hoodie that matched one found in Deshaun's closet, and a white cashier's shaky testimony claiming she knew it was him because of his look. Marcus had seen this script before too many times. Deshaun's fear was palpable, his hands trembling as he sat beside Marcus, whispering, "They're gonna lock me up, mister." "Right. They always do." Marcus placed a steady hand on his shoulder, his voice low but firm. "Not today, kid. Not if I can help it." The opening statements were a bloodbath. Grayson painted Deshaun as a thug, a word he lingered on, letting it hang in the air like poison. He leaned into stereotypes, describing Deshaun's neighborhood as a breeding ground for crime, his tone slick with condescension. Marcus felt his jaw tighten but kept his composure. When it was his turn, he rose, buttoned his jacket, and faced the jury. "This case isn't about a robbery," he began, his voice steady but carrying an edge that made the room hush. "It's about a system that sees a young black man and assumes guilt before evidence. Deshaun Carter is not your scapegoat." The jury shifted uncomfortably. A few leaned forward. Others crossed their arms. Marcus didn't flinch. He laid out the facts. The security footage was too grainy to identify anyone definitively. The hoodie was a common brand sold at every Walmart in the state, and the cashier's testimony was riddled with inconsistencies. But Marcus knew facts alone wouldn't sway this jury. He had to make them feel the weight of Deshaun's life, the injustice of a system that targeted him before he'd even had a chance to speak. As the trial unfolded, Marcus worked tirelessly, cross-examining witnesses with surgical precision. The cashier stumbled over her story, admitting she'd only seen the robber for a second or two. The police officer who arrested Deshaun couldn't explain why he'd ignored 3 other suspects in the area, all of whom matched the vague description. Marcus caught every slip, every crack in the prosecution's case, but he could feel the jury's resistance. Some stared at him with thinly veiled disdain, as if his very presence challenged their worldview. Outside the courtroom, the case was igniting a firestorm. Protesters gathered daily, chanting Deshaun's name, holding signs that read "Justice for the Innocent" and "End Racial Profiling." The local news ran segments that framed Marcus as either a hero or a troublemaker, depending on the outlet. Social media was worse. Posts tore into him, some calling him a race baiter, others praising his courage. Marcus ignored it all, but the pressure was mounting. His wife, Lena, saw the toll it took, the way he barely slept, poring over case files late into the night. "You're carrying the world, Marcus," she'd say, her voice soft but worried. He'd only nod, unable to explain the fire in his chest, the need to prove them wrong not just for Deshaun, but for every kid like him. By the 3rd day, Marcus uncovered something explosive. A tip from a community activist led him to a second security camera, one the police had overlooked. The footage, grainy but damning, showed a different man, white, mid-30s, wearing a similar hoodie, leaving the gas station minutes before the robbery. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The truth. But getting it admitted into evidence would be a war. Grayson would fight tooth and nail, and the judge, a stern older man named Whitaker, had already shown impatience with Marcus's theatrics. As Marcus prepared to present the new evidence, he caught Grayson whispering to an aide, a smug grin on his face. The room felt like it was closing in, the air heavy with unspoken bias. Marcus straightened his tie, took a breath, and stepped forward. This wasn't just about Deshaun anymore. It was about every black man who'd been judged before a trial, every lawyer like Marcus who'd been told they didn't belong. He was ready to fight. Marcus stood before Judge Whitaker, holding the flash drive with the new footage like it was a grenade. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of papers from Grayson's table. Marcus's voice was calm, but carried a steel edge. Your Honor, we have newly discovered evidence that directly contradicts the prosecution's narrative. Grayson shot up, his face reddening. Objection. This is a stunt, Your Honor. The defense had ample time to review evidence during discovery. Marcus didn't blink. This footage was withheld by the police. Your Honor. It wasn't in the discovery materials. The judge's eyes narrowed, his fingers tapping the gavel. Approach the bench, he said curtly. Marcus and Grayson stood side by side, the tension between them crackling. Marcus handed over the drive, explaining how the activist had obtained it from a nearby store's security system. Grayson scoffed, his voice dripping with skepticism. This is hearsay at best. The chain of custody is questionable. Marcus countered. The footage is time-stamped, clear, and relevant. It shows a suspect the police never investigated. Judge Whitaker leaned back, his face unreadable. I'll review it in chambers. Court is recessed until tomorrow. The next morning, the courtroom was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Reporters lined the back, scribbling furiously. Protesters outside chanted louder, their voices filtering through the windows. Marcus felt the weight of their hope, their anger, pressing against him. Deshawn sat beside him, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. You think this'll work, mister? Right. He whispered. Marcus met his gaze. It has to. Judge Whitaker returned, his expression grim. The footage is admissible, he declared, and a murmur rippled through the room. Grayson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Marcus wasted no time, projecting the video onto a screen for the jury. The grainy image showed a man, not Deshawn, slipping out of the gas station, his hoodie pulled tight, his movements furtive. Marcus narrated, his voice steady but charged. This individual was never questioned. The police zeroed in on my client because he fit a profile, not evidence. The jury's faces shifted, some looked troubled, others skeptical. Marcus pressed on, calling the activist, a woman named Tamika Jones, to the stand. Tamika, a community organizer with a fierce presence, testified about the police's negligence, how they dismissed her when she first mentioned the second camera. They didn't want to hear it, she said, her voice cutting through the room. They had their guy, and he was black. That's all they needed. Grayson's cross-examination was brutal, painting Tamika as an agitator with an agenda, but she held her ground, her eyes blazing. The trial took a darker turn when Grayson called a surprise witness, a police officer named Daniels, who claimed to have seen Deshawn near the gas station that night. Marcus's heart sank. Daniels was a respected veteran, his word carrying weight. But Marcus caught a flicker of hesitation in the officer's eyes during cross-examination. You saw my client from a distance. In the dark. Correct. Marcus asked. Daniels nodded, uneasy. And you didn't see the robbery itself, did you? Daniels admitted he hadn't. Marcus leaned in, his voice sharp. So your testimony is based on a glimpse of a black teenager in a hoodie, in a neighborhood where he lives. Is that right? The officer faltered, and the jury noticed. Outside, the protests grew louder, spilling onto the courthouse steps. X-posts exploded with hashtags like Free Deshawn and Justice for All. But the backlash was vicious too. Marcus's inbox filled with hate mail, some calling him slurs, others threatening his family. Lena begged him to hire security, but he refused, saying, I can't hide from this. It's bigger than me. Still, he checked the locks on their doors each night, his stomach twisting with worry. As the trial neared its climax, Marcus uncovered another bombshell, an internal police memo, leaked by an anonymous source, instructing officers to prioritize high-risk profiles in Deshawn's neighborhood. The memo didn't mention race explicitly, but the subtext was clear. Marcus knew this could turn the case, but it would also inflame tensions. He prepared to introduce it, aware that Grayson would fight dirty to discredit it. The courtroom was a powder keg, and Marcus was about to strike a match. The courtroom felt like a battlefield as Marcus prepared to introduce the leaked police memo. He held the document in his hands, its words searing into his mind. Prioritize high-risk profiles in designated zones. It was coded language, but to anyone who'd lived in Deshawn's neighborhood, it screamed racial targeting. Marcus knew this could redefine the case, not just for Deshawn, but for every person who'd been profiled and discarded by a system that saw them as threats first, humans second. But the risk was enormous. Grayson would tear into him, and the judge might see it as a desperate ploy. Marcus rose, his voice steady despite the pulse hammering in his ears. Your Honor, the defense submits evidence of systemic bias in the Jefferson County Police Department's practices, directly relevant to my client's arrest. He held up the memo, its stark black text projected for all to see. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Grayson leapt to his feet, his face a mask of fury. Objection. This is an unauthenticated document, likely fabricated to inflame the jury. Marcus countered. This memo was provided by a credible source within the department. Your Honor, it explains why my client was targeted without evidence. Judge Whitaker's face was stone, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I'll allow it, pending verification, he said, his voice tight. Marcus exhaled, but the victory was short-lived. Grayson's cross-examination of the memo's authenticity was relentless, painting Marcus as a manipulator trying to play the race card. He called an expert witness, a forensic analyst, who questioned the memo's origins, suggesting it could be a fake. Marcus fought back, presenting metadata from the email leak that tied it to the police department's servers. But the jury's faces were hard to read. Some looked shaken, others defiant. The trial's intensity spilled beyond the courtroom. Protesters now numbered in the hundreds, their chants a constant drumbeat outside. News vans lined the street, cameras catching every raised fist and sign. Marcus's name was everywhere in X, in editorials, on talk shows. Some called him a crusader for justice. Others branded him a divisive opportunist. The hate mail grew uglier, with one letter describing in chilling detail what would happen to his family if he didn't back off. Lena found it first and made him promise to report it. But Marcus hesitated. He didn't trust the police to protect him, not after what he'd uncovered. Deshawn, meanwhile, was unraveling. The pressure of the trial, the media circus, and the fear of prison were eating at him. During a break, he grabbed Marcus's arm, his voice trembling. If they lock me up, what happens to my mom? She's got no one else. Marcus looked into the boy's eyes, seeing the weight of a life that had never been given a fair shot. We're not there yet, Deshawn, he said, his voice firm. You hold on. I'm fighting for you. Marcus called his next witness, a former police officer named Carla Ruiz, who'd left the department after witnessing systemic bias firsthand. Carla's testimony was a gut punch. She described how officers were pressured to meet arrest quotas in high-risk areas, how Black and Latino kids were targeted for minor infractions while others were let go. Deshawn Carter was just another name on a list, she said, her voice breaking. The jury leaned forward, some visibly shaken. Grayson tried to discredit her, painting her as a disgruntled ex-cop with a vendetta, but her sincerity was undeniable. As the day ended, Marcus overheard Grayson talking to a colleague in the hallway, his voice low but sharp. Wright's turning this into a circus. He's not winning on evidence, he's winning on emotion. Marcus clenched his fists but kept walking. Grayson wasn't wrong. Emotion was part of it, but only because the truth was emotional. It was the pain of a kid like Deshaun, the rage of a community ignored, the hope that justice might, for once, mean something. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, the memo spread out before him, its words blurring as his mind raced. Lena sat beside him, her hand on his. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "But you're not alone in this. Let me help carry it." Marcus nodded, but the weight didn't lift. Tomorrow, he'd face Grayson's final push, and the jury would start deliberating. The truth was on his side, but truth alone had never been enough. The courtroom was a pressure cooker as closing arguments loomed. Marcus had spent the night refining his words, knowing this was his last chance to sway the jury. The evidence was strong: the second camera footage, the leaked memo, Carla's testimony, but juries weren't computers. They were people, swayed by fear, bias, or hope. Marcus had to make them see Deshaun not as a thug, but as a kid who'd been failed by a system that judged him by his skin. Grayson went first, his voice smooth and commanding. He leaned hard into the original evidence, the cashier's testimony, the hoodie, the officer's sighting. "Don't be distracted by the defense's theatrics," he told the jury, his eyes sweeping over them. "This case is simple. A crime was committed, and the evidence points to Deshaun Carter." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." Marcus watched the jury, noting the nods from a few, the crossed arms of others. Grayson was good, too good. When Marcus stood, the room seemed to hold its breath. He didn't look at his notes. He didn't need to. This case was never simple. He began, his voice low but resonant. "It's about a young man who was arrested not because of evidence, but because of who he is." Deshaun Carter wasn't seen as a person who was seen as a profile. He walked slowly toward the jury, his eyes locking with theirs. "You've seen the footage of another suspect, ignored by police. You've heard about a memo that targets kids like Deshaun. You've heard a former officer admit the system is broken. Ask yourselves, if Deshaun were white, would we be here?" The room was silent, save for the faint creak of a juror's chair. Marcus pointed to Deshaun, who sat with his head bowed. "That young man deserves a future, not a prison cell. You have the power to give him that. Don't let prejudice win." He returned to his seat, his heart pounding. The jury's faces were a mix of emotion. Some looked moved, others unreadable. Judge Whitaker gave his instructions, and the jury filed out to deliberate. Marcus sat with Deshaun, who whispered, "You think they believed you?" Marcus forced a smile. "I think they heard me." But doubt gnawed at him. He'd seen juries ignore evidence before, swayed by fear or bias. Outside, the protests had grown chaotic, with police in riot gear facing off against demonstrators. Ex-posts were a war zone of opinions, some hailing Marcus as a hero, others calling for his disbarment. Hours dragged on. Marcus paced the hallway, ignoring Grayson's smug glances. Lena stayed close, her presence a quiet anchor. Then, a bombshell dropped. A juror had been caught discussing the case on X, posting about keeping criminals off the streets. Marcus's team filed for a mistrial, but Judge Whitaker denied it, saying the jurors' bias wasn't proven. Marcus's stomach twisted. The system was fighting back, as it always did. When the jury returned, the air was thick with dread, The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, stood. We find the defendant, Deshaun Carter, not guilty. The courtroom erupted cheers from Deshaun's family, gasps from others. Deshaun collapsed into Marcus's arms, sobbing. Marcus held him, his own eyes stinging. Grayson stormed out, his face a mask of fury. But the victory felt hollow. Marcus knew this wasn't the end. The memo, the footage, the protest feed exposed a wound that wouldn't heal easily. As he left the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones in his face. Mr. Right. What's next? One shouted. Marcus paused, the crowd parting around him. This isn't just about one case, he said, his voice steady. It's about changing a system that's been broken for too long. That night, Marcus and Lena watched the news. The verdict was national headlines, with pundits debating its implications. Ex-posts exploded, some celebrating, others raging. Marcus's phone buzzed with messages of support from allies, threats from strangers. He turned it off, exhaustion settling in. Lena squeezed his hand. You did it, she said. Marcus shook his head. We're just getting started. The verdict reverberated beyond Jefferson County. Marcus became a symbol overnight, his face plastered across news channels and ex-posts. Some called him a beacon of hope, others a lightning rod for division. Deshaun's acquittal was a victory, but Marcus knew it was a single battle in a much larger war. The leaked memo had sparked investigations into the police department, with activists demanding accountability. Protests continued, now spreading to other cities, their chants echoing Marcus's closing argument, "Don't let prejudice win." But the backlash was fierce. Marcus's law firm was inundated with hate mail. Some letters so vile Lena refused to let him read them. A brick was thrown through his office window, shattering glass and leaving a note that read, "You're next." Marcus reported it, but the police response was lukewarm, their investigation stalling. He installed security cameras at home, though he hated the feeling of living under siege. Lena's worry deepened, her voice trembling one night as she asked, "Is this worth our safety?" Marcus didn't have an answer, only a burning resolve to keep going. He took on new cases, each one a mirror of Deshaun Black and Latino men targeted by flimsy evidence and systemic bias. Marcus worked pro bono, his savings dwindling, but he couldn't turn away. Every client was a reminder of why he'd become a lawyer, to give a voice to those the system silenced. He partnered with Tamika Jones, the activist, to push for policy changes, demanding an end to arrest quotas and racial profiling. Their meetings drew crowds, their words amplified on X, where Justice for All trended alongside vitriolic counter-hashtags. The pressure was relentless. Marcus's health began to fray sleepless nights, skipped meals, a constant knot in his chest. Lena noticed, urging him to slow down, but he couldn't. "If I stop, who picks up the fight?" he'd say. Then came a call from a national civil rights organization. They wanted Marcus to lead a class action lawsuit against the Jefferson County Police Department, alleging systemic discrimination. It was a chance to make history, but it would paint a bigger target on his back. Marcus hesitated, weighing the cost. The threats were escalating. Anonymous calls, a slashed tire, a stranger lingering too long outside their house. Lena was pregnant now, their first child due in months, and the thought of bringing a baby into this storm haunted him. But Deshaun's face, tear-streaked and grateful after the verdict, stayed with him too. So did the faces of every client he'd fought for, every protester chanting his name. He agreed to the lawsuit, knowing it could break him. The case drew national attention, with Marcus testifying before a congressional committee on policing reform. His voice, once confined to a small Alabama courtroom, now carried across the country. He spoke of Deshaun, of the memo, of a system that sees black lives as disposable. The room was silent, lawmakers shifting uncomfortably. X lit up with reactions, some praising his courage, others calling him a traitor. Marcus ignored the noise, focusing on the work. Back home, the lawsuit gained traction. Depositions revealed more damning evidence. Emails between officers joking about cleaning up Deshaun's neighborhood. Data showing disproportionate arrests of black men. Marcus's team grew, with young lawyers inspired by his fight joining the cause. But Grayson, now a consultant for the police union, fought back, leaking stories to the press that painted Marcus as a profiteer exploiting racial tensions. The smear campaign stung, but Marcus kept his eyes on the goal, justice, not just for Deshaun, but for a generation. One night, as Marcus prepared for another deposition, Lena sat him down. "You're changing things, Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "But you don't have to carry it alone." She handed him a list of allies, activists, lawyers, even a few cops who had reached out to help. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The fight was far from over, but he wasn't alone. The class action lawsuit was a beast, sprawling and complex, with Marcus at its helm. He spent days in depositions, nights strategizing with his team, and mornings dodging reporters. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of data showing black and Latino men arrested at 5 times the rate of their white counterparts. Internal police communications mocking problem neighborhoods, and training materials that leaned heavily on racial stereotypes. Marcus's team built a case that was airtight, but the opposition was formidable. The police union, backed by Grayson's legal maneuvering, fought every motion, delaying hearings and burying Marcus in paperwork. Public sentiment was a roller coaster. X posts swung wildly. Some users shared stories of their own encounters with biased policing. Others accused Marcus of waging war on law enforcement. Protests grew, with clashes between demonstrators and police making nightly news. Marcus's name was a lightning rod, his every move dissected. A conservative talk show host called him the most dangerous man in Alabama, while a viral X video of his congressional testimony garnered millions of views, with comments hailing him as a hero. The threats didn't stop. Marcus's car was vandalized, spray-painted with a slur. He stopped checking his mail after a package arrived with a dead rat inside. Lena, now visibly pregnant, insisted they move temporarily to her sister's house in Atlanta. But Marcus refused. "This is our home," he said, his voice stubborn but strained. He hired private security, a bitter necessity, and kept working. Deshaun, now free and trying to rebuild his life, called Marcus weekly, his gratitude a reminder of why this mattered. A breakthrough came when a whistleblower, a veteran detective named Paul Kessler, came forward. Kessler, white and nearing retirement, had seen enough. He testified about a culture of us versus them in the department, where black communities were treated as enemy territory. His words carried weight, cracking the narrative that Marcus was exaggerating. The jury in the lawsuit different from Deshaun's trial, but just as skeptical began to shift, their faces softening as Kessler spoke. Grayson countered with a media blitz, leaking selective body cam footage to paint the police as victims of circumstance. He argued that officers were just doing their jobs in dangerous areas. Marcus saw through the spin, but it was effective. Polls showed public opinion split, with many believing the police were unfairly targeted. Marcus took to X himself, posting a simple message: justice isn't about comfort. It's about truth. The post went viral, but so did the hate, with trolls flooding his mentions. The lawsuit's turning point came during a deposition with the police chief, who crumbled under Marcus's questioning. Asked why the department ignored the second camera footage in Deshawn's case, the chief stammered, admitting it was an oversight. Marcus pressed further, revealing a pattern of similar oversights in cases involving black suspects. The room was silent, the chief's credibility in tatters. Marcus's team exchanged glances. They had a real shot now. But the personal cost was mounting. Marcus missed doctor's appointments with Lena, their conversations growing strained. One night, she broke down, tears streaming as she held her belly. "I'm scared, Marcus. Not just for you. For us." He held her, promising to be more present. But the lawsuit consumed him. Every win in court felt like a step toward justice, but also a step deeper into a fight that might never end. As the trial neared its climax, Marcus prepared for closing arguments, knowing this was his chance to cement the case. He stayed up late, drafting words that would resonate not just with the jury, but with a nation watching. The evidence was on his side, but he needed the jury to feel the human cost of a broken system. Deshawn's face, Tamika's resolve, Kessler's courage, they all fueled him. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a reckoning. The courtroom for the class action lawsuit was a different beast than Deshawn's trial, larger, colder, with a jury that felt like a microcosm of America itself, divided, tense, and weary. Marcus stood before them, his notes untouched, his voice carrying the weight of every case he'd fought. "This isn't about one officer or one arrest," he began, his eyes sweeping the jury. "It's about a system that has, for decades, targeted people based on the color of their skin. You've seen the data: black men arrested at 5 times the rate of white men for the same crimes. You've heard the whistleblower, a detective who risked everything to tell the truth. You've seen the emails, the memos, the culture that says some lives matter less." He paused, letting the silence settle. This lawsuit isn't just about money. It's about accountability. It's about saying, "No more." You have the power to demand change. The jury was riveted, some nodding, others gripping their notepads. Marcus pointed to a chart projected behind him, showing arrest disparities. "These aren't numbers. These are live sons, brothers, fathers. People like Deshawn Carter, who almost lost his future because of a system that saw him as guilty before he ever stepped into a courtroom." Grayson's closing was predictably slick, framing the police as overworked heroes making split-second decisions in dangerous neighborhoods. "Mr. Wright wants you to believe this is about race," he said, his tone measured but sharp. "It's about safety. Officers do what they must to protect us all." He leaned on the jury's fears, painting a picture of chaos if the department was handcuffed by the lawsuit's demands. Marcus watched the jury's reaction. Some seemed swayed, others skeptical. It was a gamble, as always. The jury deliberated for 3 days, each one agonizing. Marcus spent the time with Lena, trying to reconnect. They walked through a park, her hand in his, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. "When this is over," she said softly, "promise me we'll take a trip. Just us." Marcus nodded, but his mind was still in the courtroom. The verdict would shape not just his career, but the fight for justice nationwide. When the jury returned, the foreperson, a black woman with a calm demeanor, read the verdict. "We find the Jefferson County Police Department liable for systemic discrimination." The room gasped, then erupted in cheers from Marcus's team. The jury awarded damages to the plaintiffs and mandated reforms, independent oversight, mandatory bias training, and an end to arrest quotas. Marcus felt a rush of relief, but it was tempered. This was a victory, but not a cure. Outside, The protests turned celebratory, with Tamika leading chants of "We won't stop." News outlets called it a landmark case, with Marcus's name synonymous with change. X posts exploded, some hailing the verdict as justice, others decrying it as an attack on police. Marcus ignored the noise, focusing on his next steps. The reforms were a start, but implementation would be a fight. He met with activists, planning to hold the department accountable, knowing resistance would be fierce. At home, Lena gave birth to their daughter, Amara, a week later. Holding her, Marcus felt a new kind of resolve. This fight wasn't just for Deshawn or the plaintiffs, it was for Amara, for a world where she wouldn't face the same battles. But the threats didn't stop. A late-night call warned, "You can't hide forever." Marcus tightened security, his heart heavy but unbroken. He began speaking at rallies, his voice growing stronger. "This verdict is a beginning, not an end," he told a crowd in Birmingham. "Change comes when we refuse to look away." The crowd roared, their energy fueling him. He knew the road ahead was long, but for the first time, he felt a movement building, one that wouldn't be silenced. The verdict's echo was still rippling when Marcus took the stage at a national conference on policing reform, his face now a symbol of resistance and hope. The room was packed: activists, lawmakers, even a few officers who'd begun to question their own system. Marcus's speech was raw, unscripted. "We won in court," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "But the real fight is in our streets, our laws, our hearts. Every time a kid like Deshawn is profiled, we lose a piece of who we're supposed to be. America is better than this." The crowd rose, their applause thunderous. X lit up with clips of his speech, the hashtag #MarcusRight trending alongside Justice Now. But the backlash was unrelenting. Conservative pundits called the verdict a witch hunt, while anonymous threats kept pouring in. Marcus's security team intercepted a suspicious package at his office, forcing an evacuation. Lena, cradling Amara, begged him to step back, just for a while. "You've done enough," she said, her eyes wet. Marcus shook his head. Enough isn't justice. He threw himself into oversight, ensuring the court-mandated reforms were enforced. The police department dragged its feet, claiming budget issues. But Marcus and Tamika organized protests that kept the pressure on. Deshawn, now enrolled in community college, joined them, speaking at rallies about his ordeal. "Mr. Wright saved my life," he told a crowd, his voice cracking. "He showed me I'm worth fighting for." Marcus, standing nearby, felt his throat tighten. Moments like these kept him going. The national spotlight brought new opportunities. Marcus was invited to advise on federal policing reform, his expertise shaping policies that could ripple across states. He met with families who'd lost loved ones to police violence, their stories fueling his fire. But the personal toll was heavy. He missed Amara's first smile, too buried in work. Lena's patience frayed, though she never stopped supporting him. One night, she left a note on his desk: "We're proud of you. Just come home sometimes." A year after the verdict, Judge Whitaker, now retired, reached out unexpectedly. They met at a quiet cafe, the old man's face lined with regret. "I didn't see it at first," Whitaker admitted, his voice low. "The bias, the system, it was invisible to me. Your case opened my eyes." He paused, then added, "My final ruling was my proudest moment." Those words hit Marcus hard. Whitaker's ruling had mandated the reforms, and his admission was a small but seismic shift to judge, once part of the system, acknowledging its flaws. Marcus's fight continued, but he began to share the load. He mentored young lawyers, building a network to carry the torch. Tamika launched a nonprofit to monitor police accountability. With Marcus on the board, Deshaun became an advocate, his story inspiring others. The movement was growing, rooted in the truth Marcus had exposed in that Alabama courtroom. On Amara's first birthday, Marcus took a rare day off. He and Lena threw a small party, laughter filling their home. As he watched his daughter giggle, Marcus felt a quiet peace. The threats still came. The system still resisted. But he saw changes low. Hard-won, but real. That night, he spoke at a rally. His words broadcast nationwide. "This fight isn't mine alone," he said, his voice ringing clear. "It's ours. For Deshaun. For Amara. For every life that matters. We keep going." The crowd roared, their voices echoing across the country, just as Judge Whitaker's final words had. Marcus looked out, seeing faces of every color, united in purpose. The road was long, but for the first time, he believed they could walk it together.